How many of you have heard about the Arizona law and what's happened? You can't avoid it. It's in the news everywhere. I'm glad most of you have heard about it, but I want to talk about that. I think the topic here is Arizona versus the Constitution. Very relevant, because yes, in my opinion, I do believe that Arizona has overstepped a boundary that is reserved for federal government. Arizona wanted to implement an immigration enforcement scheme, and they passed a law that was an immigration enforcement scheme that would have mandated for local law enforcement officials and everyday citizens, really, to enforce federal immigration laws. Why is that a problem? The problem is that essentially Arizona wanted to make sure that they were doing this. And if you read the Arizona legislation, and yes, I have read the Arizona legislation, I have read the updated legislation, and I have read the federal court ruling associated with the result of where we are now. So in case any of you were thinking, well, has he read it? Yes, I have read it. I spent the time to read it. But Arizona was really going above and beyond of what the federal government is allowed to do. The federal government does partner with some local law enforcement agencies to try to get a hold of making sure that they can enforce federal immigration laws to those that are committing very serious crimes against our country. And I have no problem with that. I have no problem with making sure that local law enforcement has every tool available for enforcement purposes to remove people that are dealing drugs, to remove people that are committing murders, that are committing rape, that are committing serious crimes against our community. I have no problem with that. But Arizona was going a step further to where any infraction would have led to the asking of paperwork, the asking of proof of citizenship. Immigration is a complex issue. It's a complex issue to enforce. It's a complex issue to regulate. And that is why a federal court ruled that Arizona, for the most part, in most of the provisions that it wanted to implement, it went too far. Does it make sense to any of you? Does it make sense to have 50 different immigration policies in this country? Does it make sense? What would that look like? Well, if I go to Alabama, I'm a U.S. citizen. If I go to Alabama, do I need to bring my passport, but my passport may not be good enough? Do I need to bring my birth certificate? Where is my birth certificate? Or is my Social Security card good enough? How else? How do you prove right now your citizenship? If you say driver's license, immigrants can get driver's licenses. You can't. Most of you probably cannot prove that you are U.S. citizens right now, today. Most of you are not carrying your birth certificates with you. Most of you are not carrying your naturalization papers with you. Most of you are not carrying your passports with you. Do we really want to be a nation where every time we encounter a law enforcement official, we're going to hear papers, please? Taking history, when was the last time that we had that kind of a fascist regime? Remember? Where was it? Hitler? Nazi Germany? Papers, please. Remember that? That's not the country that I want to live in. I don't want to make sure that we create an environment where local law enforcement are given such unprecedented power to be able to stop anybody for any reason whatsoever in order for us to enforce our immigration laws. We can do it better. We must do it better. And obviously, with the ruling in Arizona, the federal courts are starting to stop some of the nonsense of states stepping into this this area of creating immigration schemes of enforcement. Not convinced? Move to Pennsylvania. A recent court ruling, federal court ruling as well, has ruled against Hazleton, Pennsylvania. You may have forgotten about Hazleton, Pennsylvania. It's been in the court system maybe about, I think about maybe 4 or 5 years. Hazleton, Pennsylvania, a local municipality, passed an immigration enforcement scheme also that would have required landlords to determine the legal status of people that were renting, had some provisions for employers as well. Federal courts, the appeals courts, ruled, Hazleton, you can't do that. You're creating an immigration enforcement scheme, and according to the Constitution, and according to federal courts and Supreme Court precedents, local municipalities cannot engage in creating immigration schemes or immigration enforcement schemes. That is solely the responsibility of the federal government and our U.S. Congress. U.S. Congress has abdicated its responsibility in reflecting our current needs and really ignored this issue of immigration for over 20 years, which is why we are in the situation that we're in right now. We've got 11 million people in this country illegally. About 4 to 5 million of those are children. So where do we go from here? Federal courts are clearly indicating, and this hasn't been determined definitively yet. This will work its way through the federal court process that will ultimately reach the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have a say on this issue. But fundamentally, what the red flags that the federal courts are raising right now, and conservative judges are raising red flags associated with this, is that states and municipalities cannot engage in creating their own immigration schemes, because it would not make sense for us to have 50 different immigration policies in this country.